45-minute attention span test.
Rook Exodus Edition.
A couple of months ago, I introduced you guys to one of my favorite stories of this year called Rook Exodus, and you guys freaking loved it. To me, it's kind of like Mad Max if Mad Max was way cooler. So with that being said, here are all 6 issues that are out so far, narrated by yours truly. This is Rook, and I can't even begin to express how incredible him and his story are, so let's just start from the beginning. Planet Exodus was a planet purchased by the company Better World in 2152. It was colonized in 2159, but by 2170, the world engine began to fail, which is something that I'll explain later. The year is now 2173, where Rook begins to explain that nobody knew why the world engine failed, but it did. As the system shut down, everyone who bought a ticket to this manufactured planet of broken promises bought another ticket to get off of it. And as the last ship of the paying population boarded the fleeting ships, Better World promised that they'd come back for Rook and their other employees, but they never did, and it's been 2 years since then. Nothing has come down from the sky to rescue them. The only things flying are ships flying out of there, attempting to leave the planet behind. But most of the people who make these ships aren't rocket scientists, so for every one that makes it through the clouds, another 50 explode in mid-air, crash landing back on Exodus. Now, because Rook is also looking to get off of Exodus, he's building a rocket as well and constantly scavenging for parts. So the ships that fail to make it off planet give him hope because there's still a lot of functional components at their crash sites, and upon his arrival to one nearby, he tries reaching out to his friend Swine through his helmet, telling him that he's gathering parts and needs his help. But according to Swine, he wasn't able to join him because he was way out of range and currently looking through a crash site of his own. Rook was definitely irritated upon hearing this because without any help from Swine's pigs and boars, finding what he needed in this burning wreck before it was melted was gonna be impossible. Nevertheless, he continued sorting through the wreckage until discovering that the pilot of the ship was still alive. It wouldn't be for long though, considering the massive spike piercing through his abdomen, but still Rook felt obligated to ease his pain, so he pulled out a Medi-Bedi with painkillers to help his discomfort. But to his surprise, the pilot refused to take them, instead handing Rook a folder while saying don't let them burn. Now obviously Rook was confused but respected the man's wishes and disengaged. After that, he began to express that his mind was connected to the birds. He pushed their thoughts and controlled their actions, which is something extremely important to this character and honestly the entire universe, because besides just looking extremely cool, Rook's helmet actually serves a purpose and allows him to control Rook's crows and ravens. You see, Better World hired him to be a warden, and wardens were tasked with the responsibility of controlling Better World's engineered wildlife. Their patented neural network system gave the wardens complete control of every animal on Exodus so they can make them work for them. There's a warden who controls the pigs, who is Rook's best friend Swine. There's a warden who controls the bears, the wolves, and so on and so forth. But because the world engine is failing now, the engine that these helmets run on, they aren't always reliable, so sometimes the animals are able to refuse orders. But nevertheless, Rook tells his ravens to stay away from the dying pilot because he knew that they wanted to eat him. After that, Rook was taken by surprise when a massive bear came raging out of the smoke, attempting to end his life. So he dove out of the way and started blasting it with his hand cannon, but to no surprise, the bear was unrelenting, using its massive paw to send Rook flying directly onto the ground. At that point, he knew he was on the verge of defeat, so with his back against the wall, he pounced on the bear's neck, where he relentlessly jammed his knife into its neck repeatedly, but because it wasn't even phased in the slightest, he re-established his connection to the birds, who immediately came to his defense, swarming and picking the bear apart with everything they had until it eventually retreated. After their victory, Rook buried the pilot and began searching for something for the birds to eat because he knew they were starving. Later on, he drove to his base of operations, a city called New Mason that was once populated by almost 800,000 people, but now its only resident was Rook and only served as the location housing his rocket. Upon getting out of his vehicle, he took off his helmet while expressing that he needed a break from the birds, and while eating what food he had left, he quickly realized that he was running low on alcohol, so he took a trip into town to restock his supplies. And after making his way to the top of some apartments, we see that a bunch of rooms in the building are spray painted with red X's because those are the rooms he already foraged through. Once he got what he needed from apartment 333, he marked it the same as all the others and then decided to to go watch a movie at the theater all by himself. During his time there, he opened up the folder handed to him by the pilot earlier, discovering a picture of the pilot and his family, which explains why he told him not to let them burn, but also left Rook puzzled and curious as to where this family was. The days that followed were pretty much identical to the days prior, consisting of scavenging for food, drinking healthy amounts of alcohol, and working on his ship. But as time continued passing, he grew more and more on edge because time was running out and resources were growing more scarce. The story then goes to what used to be a lake. Rook swore there was water there just a few days ago, and as his hunger for food persisted, he expressed that his birds would be hungry as well soon, and that the only reason they hadn't eaten him yet was because of his helmet. Soon enough, he reunited with his friend Swine finally, but not without being trampled by his hogs, who immediately started eating all of his fish upon their arrival. Once Swine entered the scene, he apologized for his hogs' behavior and expressed that they hadn't eaten today, so their hunger was overriding his commands. To try and regain control of them, he rebooted his helmet, stating that there was something wrong with the neural network, but Rook assured him that it wasn't their helmets and was actually a result of the world engine failing. Hog wasn't so convinced though, believing something else was interfering. Nevertheless, Rook then stressed that they only had a few months and maybe even weeks before everything died. Refusing to leave his pack astray though, Swine conveyed his disinterest in leaving the planet, insisting on staying with his drift because they were more than just animals to him, but Rook thought he was crazy, exclaiming that the hogs would tear him apart once his helmet went offline. After that, Swine asked Rook if he'd spoken with any of the other wardens like Dire Wolf about the glitches with their helmet. He hadn't, and then emphasized how important it was for them to recover the parts they needed. Tonight, Hog didn't want to worry about that though, telling Rook to give it a rest so they could relax and enjoy some drinks together. Later on, when Rook was drunk, he went back to his base of operations to work on his rocket, which clearly wasn't a good idea because he accidentally caused something to explode that knocked him onto his back and caused him to go unconscious. During the time he was out, he was given a flashback of his childhood on his father's farm back on Earth. This is where we realized that he was given control of crows and ravens because he frequently dealt with them picking at their crops. But one day, after making a scarecrow in hopes of scaring them away, he noticed a bunch of massive ships flying up above in the sky, so he ran to the house to tell his father, but then the news station his father was watching caught his attention. Earth was spiraling into complete and utter chaos. The west coast was uninhabitable thanks to superfires, powerful earthquakes were striking the New Madrid fault, homelessness was at an all-time high of 33%, banks were collapsing, outbreaks of viruses were growing more and more frequent, and the world was just a really scary place to be, which is exactly why Better World purchased Planet Exodus and promised it would be a paradise. After asking his father what all of this meant, his father explained that everyone who could was leaving, but they weren't gonna run away because this was their home. 15 years later, the whole entire farm was set ablaze, including their crops, their barn, and their house, and after desperately trying to find his father by kicking down doors and helplessly calling out to him, Rook would end up losing everything that day. Once the fire was put to a stop, an unknown man assured Rook that his father did this on purpose as a dying gift for him because Better World would be able to use it as a port for Exodus, and Rook would jump to the top of the relocation line if he accepted their offer. And although he wasn't convinced this was his father's doing, Rook eventually accepted Better World's offer and became a warden. While boarding his transport, he was struck by Gil as he observed the homeless people who couldn't afford to leave Earth, but nonetheless he boarded the ship, spending the next 13 months of his life traveling to Exodus. After that, the story brings us back to present day, with Rook waking up from his accident earlier and then driving over to Swine's place in his vehicle. On his way there, he tried using his helmet to express that they were getting off this planet this very instant, but Swine gave him no response. Once he made it there, he was shocked to discover that a bunch of Swine's stuff was completely destroyed, and on top of that, a bunch of his hogs had been slaughtered. That's when the story switches things over to Swine himself, commanding his drift to run as fast as they could while in the middle of running away from something. And not just any something, but a whole entire pack of giant bears. In the midst of using his weapon to try and defend his drift, Swine was overwhelmed when a bear used an immense amount of force to crush his body into the ground. And while trying to reach for his weapon, a figure standing above him told him not to move because his spine was broken, and then ripped off his helmet while saying that his skull was crushed as well. And that figure was none other than the warden of the bears, Ursaw. You guys absolutely loved Rook and our breakdown of the first Rook Exodus issue, but I'm here to tell you right here and right now that if you thought the first issue was good, then you have absolutely no idea what's in store and how peak this story really is. And yes, this video is gonna be longer than 90% of the TikToks you see today, so if your brain rot can't survive anything more than Hawktua and Rizzler, scroll up, you lost the challenge. So we start off in the same woods we left off on. The woods where Swine and his pack of hogs were ruthlessly torn to shreds by Ursaw, the man who controls the bears, and as Dire Wolf, the warden of the wolves and good friend of Swine's, investigates the slaughter, she makes the unfortunate discovery that Swine was dead as well after coming across his body. So she orders one of her wolves to share its determination and drive, expressing that she needed the pack's animal instinct to flow through her so she could find our one and only main character, Rook. And speaking of our main character, the story then brings us to a body of water where Rook was hesitating to scavenge through an underwater crash site because his helmet's signal was weaker in water. And while in the midst of contemplating his decision, he expressed that he hadn't heard from Swine since yesterday, since finding out that his camp was on fire and many of his pigs had been slaughtered. Nevertheless, he was hopeful Swine was still alive and stayed up all night waiting for his friend to reconnect to the neural network / wildlife grid. But instead he got a reading on another crash site, and what made him even more unsure of jumping in the water was the fear of missing Swine's call if he eventually tried contacting him. Soon enough, that decision was made for him though, when a beyond enormous snapping turtle came shooting up from underneath him, immediately snapping his boat in half and swallowing a portion of his birds. So without hesitation, Rook began swimming underwater as fast as he possibly could have, and in the middle of the process, he began explaining that the warden's helmets came with a side effect referred to as instinct influence, that was sometimes beneficial and sometimes not, because when instinct influence took place, the warden starts to think and feel like the species they were connected to. And so as a result of the birds not feeling any remorse that a bunch of their fellow birds had just been eaten, Rook had to fight the feeling of overwhelming selfishness and remember to grab the part he was looking for and get out of there as quickly as possible, because there was still a chance of Swine calling him for help. After making it to shore, the snapping turtle emerged from the body of water once again, trailing Rook a lot closer than he wanted. So in an act of desperation and quick thinking, Rook clicked a button on his wrist, immediately triggering his vehicle to kill the turtle by hurling itself at full speed directly into its head. Now this basically killed two birds with one stone, because not only did it allow him to escape with the part he needed, but it also gave the birds something to fill their appetites. As we move forward, the story goes back over to New Mason, where Rook tirelessly worked all day to finish building his rocket. But despite such a big accomplishment, he expressed that he wasn't feeling any emotions because his friend Swine wasn't there, and because the birds were suppressing his humanity the same way they did with the turtle. So he removed his helmet in hopes of getting rid of the instinct influence, but because that proved completely ineffective, he started drinking extensive amounts of alcohol while questioning whether it was worth it to continue waiting for Swine. After reaching his limit, he started passing out in the chair he was sitting in, only to be interrupted just a few moments later by his former love interest, Dire Wolf. Because he didn't realize who she was at first, he pulled out his hand cannon on her, but after regaining his senses, he put his weapon down, and Donica asked him where his helmet was. Underwhelmed with the question because he thought that that was all she was there for, Rook then asked why her and her father were still trying to save this world, because it definitely couldn't be saved. And that's when Dire Wolf revealed the actual reason she was there, informing him that Swine was dead now. Struck by emotion, Rook would then put his head down while stating that he was so close to getting him off this planet alive. Soon enough, Donica started asking him about his rocket, and so after taking her to it, Rook expressed that Swine and his pigs were responsible for sniffing out most of the parts, and that it was finally finished, which meant that he was leaving tonight now that Swine was gone, and he wanted Donica to go with him. But you see, the reason Rook and Donica's relationship failed to last was because it was against company rules, and she was a company woman. So much so that she still believed Exodus was worth fighting for, claiming that Betterworld was coming to make things right by fixing the world engine. Rook's belief stayed the same though, stressing that nobody was coming back for them and that their recklessness resulted in the death of Hog, so he didn't care for Betterworld's world anymore. After that, he indicated that his rocket could be their second chance and their only chance. But in the midst of doing so, both of them were caught by surprise when a massive explosion in the city erupted. That's when Dire Wolf expressed that he was here, and upon asking her who, Donica stated the man who who murdered our friend, as Ursaw and his massive weaponized vehicle, accompanied by his wild pack of bears, came gunning directly towards them. Using his helmet to establish his connection to the wildlife grid, Ursaw then commanded his merciless beasts to kill them, and immediately upon doing so, they started blasting in Rook and Donika's direction with the turrets latched onto their backs. Nevertheless, because Donika believed it wasn't the bears' fault, she instructed Rook not to use lethal force and then used her weapon to strike two of them with darts, causing them to fall asleep. But unfazed by his decreased forces, Ursaw continued forward, ordering his soldiers not to stop for anything. Knowing that his system was already plugged into the city's surveillance system, Donika then expressed their need to get out of the city immediately. Moments later, somebody tried reaching out to her through the helmet, stating that it wasn't too late to join them. But when Rook asked her who it was, she told him she'd explain after they weren't dead. At that point, while returning fire to the bears, Rook conveyed that their best chance at survival was getting to his rocket, stating that they could leave right now. But right after doing so, Ursaw shut down any hope of getting off this planet by blasting the rocket with the cannon attached to his vehicle. Everything Rook had worked so long and hard for was nothing more than a burning pile of wreckage now. Yet whatever he was feeling right now was completely insignificant because he couldn't just stand there and die, so him and Donika booted up their vehicles, getting out of there as fast as possible. As they made their escape, Donika apologized for what happened to his ship, stating that she could still help him get off Exodus if he still wanted to leave, but before doing so, he'd have to help her. Rook didn't need any convincing though, because if helping her meant killing the warden who killed his friend and destroyed his ticket off this planet, then he was in. Donika then explained that Ursaw wasn't actually a warden. The only reason he had a helmet was due to the fact that he stole it, and the reason he was so huge was because he'd undergone genetic alteration just like his bears. After that, Rook asked what he wanted, and according to Donika, he wanted Exodus, which didn't make any sense to Rook because Exodus was dying. But based on what Donika believed, Exodus could still be saved, but only if they got to the other wardens before Ursaw himself did. And with things coming to a close, Ursaw then demanded his men to bring him Rook and Wolf's helmets with their heads still inside. Now the last part ended off with Rook and Dire Wolf fleeing New Mason after Ursaw the Bear Man destroyed Rook's rocket and attempted to kill them. But this issue picks up with Rook and Dire Wolf arriving to a boardwalk that Rook used to like visiting back when Exodus was thriving. But now that it was completely abandoned, the only useful thing about it was that it had a boat there. And the reason Donika and Rook needed a boat in the first place was because it was the quickest option to get them to the Oasis. And the Oasis was a hub for survivors where they housed the wildlife grid. Now, alongside the World Engine, the wildlife grid is the most powerful piece of tech ever created, functioning as a mass broadcasting orb responsible for connecting their helmets to the animals and also allowing them to contact other wardens. But going back over to Donika and Rook, soon enough Donika began explaining that in order for them to establish universal contact between the other wardens, they'd have to perform something referred to as triangulation, which was only possible with 3 separate warden helmets. So Rook assumed that they'd be meeting her father there, but after taking her helmet off, Donika expressed that he'd already been killed by Ursaw, and then told the leader of her wolf pack, Freya, to watch over the others and that they should be back soon. Upon making the discovery about her father, Rook began to apologize because he was completely unaware. But right after that, he suggested that she put her helmet back on, indicating that her pack looked at her as a male when she wasn't wearing it. Positive that he was completely wrong though, Donika then stressed that yes, the mask allows you to establish the initial connection, but once it was established, the helmet could become secondary, so if you trust them, they'll trust you. And she should know because she was actually Better World's first ever warden. In the middle of their journey on the water, Rook noted his desire to ask Donika more questions about her father, but apparently she refused to talk about it, so he avoided bringing it up and informed her that there wasn't any food on the boat at all. Moments later, he noticed one of his birds flying down to the water to scoop up a fish, and that's when he stated that the birds knew when he was hungry and would purposely find food and eat it in front of him to antagonize him. Donika believed that that was total BS though, though, telling him that he needed a better relationship with his animals. Eventually, they successfully made it to the oasis where they were addressed by the warden of the turtles named Carpus. And I just want to say hats off to the artist Jason Fabok, because he went so disgustingly hard with every single character design. But anyways, Carpus is actually 118 years old under his helmet, and the rumor was that he was still alive back when Earth still had a chance of being saved from pollution and division. And while staring both of them down, Rook questioned Donica if she was actually friends with him, because soon enough 2 giant turtles emerged from the water who were both equipped with massive arsenals and aiming them in their direction. But according to Donica, they weren't aimed at her. They were aimed at Rook, because Carpus didn't really care for him, and we'll get to why in a moment. Regardless of his feelings though, Carpus eventually led him inside, where Rook began thinking about how he'd never actually met Carpus before, and a lot of the other wardens as well, because back in his training his squad was small, consisting of him, Swine, Jackrabbit, and a few others. Nevertheless, he admitted how impressive what Carpus had accomplished here was, but it was definitely clear that being connected to the turtles for so long had an effect on him, because he walked and talked so slowly. He didn't say a word to them for a long time until asking Dire Wolf where Swine was. Rook would then answer for her, telling him that Swine was dead now thanks to Ursaw. After confirming who Rook was, Carpus expressed that he was disappointed, not because Rook couldn't be trusted, but because he couldn't be relied upon, stating that he would listen to all the wardens using the wildlife grid, and knew that Rook had built a rocket to abandon Exodus the same way Better World did. So basically Carpus doesn't like Rook because they were nothing alike. Rook wanted to abandon Exodus while he was the type to fight for it, and in fact he had already fought for it in the past, because when Better World was leaving Exodus they actually wanted to take the wildlife grid with them, but because him and other wardens like Donica's father Bloodhound fought for it, they still had it. To try and prove that he could be counted on, Rook then pointed out that Ursaw destroyed his rocket and killed his friend, but it kinda ended up backfiring, with Carpus calling him selfish for only doing this seeking revenge. Nevertheless, Donica eventually calmed the tension, saying that she was doing this for all of Exodus and urging them to plug into the wildlife grid. Before proceeding though, Carpus warned her, stating that many of the wardens were quiet, many were likely already dead, and most of the ones still alive would reject their call because just like Rook, they believed Exodus was past saving. Our comic then takes us on a detour into the woods where a buck began to run for its life because of the Ark. And besides looking like the coolest thing I've ever seen, the Ark is actually the mobile fortress of Ursaw, filled to the brim with weaponized vehicles and an arsenal like no other. And while Ursaw stood inside looking at the other helmets he'd stolen, he was approached by one of his men, telling him that he was ready for one of the helms. But completely disregarding his request, Ursaw told him to be quiet because he could hear them. We're then brought back over to Rook, Donica, and Carpus plugging themselves into the wildlife grid, with Rook questioning whether this was safe while sweating profusely. Now before we proceed, I must warn you that you are about to witness an overload of awesome, amazing coolness, because upon establishing the connection, Rook stated that the world felt like it was sucked away by a vacuum as everything went quiet and he began to hear them. All of the other wardens across the planet, and there are so freaking many and they are so freaking cool, and I'm honestly gonna go over every single one of them. So first we have Raynard the Fox, Warden of the Foxes, and honestly he's looking like a Robin Hood type of character, which is sick. Then we have Arachne, or Arachne, however you pronounce it, who's obviously the Warden of the Spiders. There's Hardhead, none other than the Warden of the Rams, and then you have this guy Stag, a Warden of the Deers, and I think he has to be my favorite. Bro looks like a straight up Sith samurai with his color scheme. And as Rook listens in on them, he starts to feel as if he's not alone, which is probably really good for him and making him realize that Exodus is worth fighting for. But after that we have Matterhorn, Warden of the Goats, and I want to point out that in Matterhorn's preview, one of her followers says, "We need to go, Apex is coming." So there's probably another villain like Ursaw out there who controls the apes, and that sounds absolutely amazing and also terrifying. Nevertheless, as we move forward, we have the Locust, who obviously controls the locusts, and then the Buffalo, which is also self-explanatory, Jackrabbit the Hare, and this one, Glacier the Polar Bear, is probably their best bet at combating Ursaw. Now you also have a Master Splinter looking one named Vermin, and as I show you each of them, you can actually see their responses as they realize Rook and the others are connecting to them. So Cockrell tells them that he'll kill them if they don't stay away from his chickens. Key to the Mountain Lion just wants to be left alone, and then we realize that Ursaw has been listening in on them the entire time, telling Rook that he sees his birds in the sky, and that's when Rook is is overwhelmed, repeatedly telling them to shut it off immediately, and after taking his helmet off, Donica asks him what he's doing, to which Rook responded, Ursaw is here, and this time he wasn't alone, being accompanied by the new Warden of the Boars, Warhog, and also the Warden of the Pythons, Ka. The last issue ended off with Rook and Direwolf establishing contact with all the other amazing looking wardens until realizing that Ursaw was about to pay them a visit and ride outside the Oasis, accompanied by Warhog and also the Warden of the Pythons, Ka. And this issue picks up right where it left off, with Rook and Donica preparing for battle and establishing connection to their animals. In the midst of doing so, Rook addresses his personal battle with the crows, saying that they constantly push against his commands and often break his helmet's connection to them by combining their minds together. They weren't his friends and displayed no signs of loyalty towards him, making it extremely hard to command them to fight. After that, he began to stress his lack of faith in planet Exodus. With the world engine offline, it's been reverting to the barren planet it was before Better World dressed it up. Donica, her father, and some of the other wardens believed it could be saved if they found and fixed the world engine, but he knew that it wasn't that simple because nature wasn't the only thing killing Exodus. Its people were too. Exactly what had happened on Earth was happening here now, and as Ursaw remarked that his mission would soon be completed, Direwolf and Rook commanded the wolves and crows to start heading their way as quickly as possible. While running through the woods trying to make contact with the threat, Rook and Donica reached out to Karpus, asking him how much time was needed for evac, because as Ursaw was closing in on them, Karpus was focused on getting the children to safety, using his army of turtles to take them downstream, but stating that the rest of his forces were staying to fight for the Oasis and to protect the wildlife grid. Rook was confused as to why the grid was even a concern right now, but according to Donica, it was probably the most important thing of all, because Ursaw would be able to locate every warden on Exodus if he managed to get his hands on it. Moments later, Rook was sent flying through a tree and onto the ground, urging Donica to tell her wolves to hurry because they just encountered their first threat. And as Rook got back up on his feet, he gazed upon the man who was wearing his friend's helmet, expressing that he made a promise to himself to bring Swine's name to justice before abandoning Exodus. Fueled by nothing more than a burning desire for revenge, he was determined to recover Swine's helmet, free his animals, and kill the man impersonating him. But after commanding his crows to swarm him, Warhog easily scared the birds away by unloading a round into the air, and then he demanded his newly acquired army to trample him. So Donica tried telling Rook to get to high ground, only to be interrupted just moments later by an immensely enormous and terrifying looking python bursting out from underneath her. Despite being overcome by fear, she then informed Rook that this was surely a distraction coordinated by Ursaw, and unsurprisingly she was right, because on the next page, while securing the wildlife grid, Karpus and his men were put to a stop when something began banging its way inside. Wondering if it was Rook or Direwolf, Karpus then called their names, but the chances of it being them were non-existent, as Rook was in the middle of being hurled into a tree by the army of hogs, and Donica was still freshly in her battle with the monstrous python. What happened next was truly a thing of nightmares, as the door came crashing down to the floor, compromised by none other than Ursaw, the most merciless villain of all, stating that the turtles were slow just like Karpus. Meanwhile, back in the forest, Donica was finally confronted by Ka, commander of pythons, who was definitely having fun with this since she actually used to be one of Donica's students back in training, a student that Donica expelled, and as she instructed her python to continue pressing the fight, Donica was left with no other choice but to leap on top of it and end its mindless rampage by stabbing her electrically charged staff into it. And shortly after that, she'd give Ka the same treatment, knocking her onto the ground while emphasizing that she didn't expel her because of bad behavior. She expelled her because of her susceptibility to instinct influence. The snakes slithered their way inside her head and changed her into a cold-hearted predator. Meanwhile, Rook struggled to keep his chance of getting revenge alive after being ruthlessly battered onto the ground by Warhog and his mace, who stated that Swine died like a pig and so would he, because his dumb birds weren't going to save him. But the thing is that Rook wasn't actually counting on the birds to save him. He was counting on Donica's wolf pack to save him, storming onto the battlefield, immediately pouncing on top of Warhog and ripping chunks of his flesh out. After that, Rook was able to free the leader of Swine's pigs, Pumbaa, from his chains, and then he secured Swine's helmet just like he said he would. Pumbaa was very grateful for being freed, because Warhog treated him in the drift like trash. But moments later, Rook was put back on edge when Donica's wolf pack started growling at him and the pigs. Apparently, Donica's helmet was experiencing some sort of interference interference, most likely due to Ursa retrieving the wildlife grid. Thankfully, while Rook stated that he wouldn't let her wolves hurt Pumbaa, Donika's helmet went back online and the wolves were tamed. After regrouping, our two protagonists began navigating back towards the oasis because Karpus wasn't responding. When asking Donika what happened to the snake lady, she responded that she retreated. Nevertheless, she sensed that something was very wrong, so they started heading towards Karpus even faster, only to discover that him and his men were overpowered by Ursa and his bears. Because he had the grid though, their only option was leaping into action, with Donika taking initiative alongside her wolves, who ganged up on the bears without hesitation. Making his move just moments later was none other than Rook, forcing his crows to overwhelm Ursa despite their lack of desire for fighting. But after Ursa got his hands on Wolf Mommy, he viciously hurled her body into Rook's, causing him to crash onto the ground and knocking his helmet off. Now that his crows were free from his control, they fled the scene without a single ounce of remorse, leaving him defenseless as Ursa wrapped his hand around his neck, dangling his body in the air while telling him he was weak just like his birds. And in a moment's notice, Rook was hurled off the dam and sent plummeting to what was possibly his death as Donika screamed his name. Now the last issue ended off with Ursa infiltrating the oasis, retrieving the wildlife grid, and then literally hurling Rook's body off of a massive dam. And what's so crazy and a really bold move for the writers is that Rook literally died, which leaves Donika as Exodus's only hope. And to your relief, I'm just joking, Rook's not actually dead, although he did think he was. He thought he died by drowning, but as he slowly regained consciousness, he not only realized that Pumbaa was standing right in front of him, but also that he was literally talking despite just being an animal. Rook was definitely freaked out by this as Pumbaa continued showcasing his yap ability, but he told Rook not to worry and then thanked him for saving his life. And at this point, it's not really clear whether Rook is just delusional as a result of his massive plummet or if it's actually real, but regardless of whatever was happening, Pumbaa then told him that he pulled him out of the river, so he should be thanking him. In addition to pulling Rook out of the river, he also pulled the warden helmets out of the river as well, but as Pumbaa expressed how much he missed his best friend Swine, Rook continued refusing to believe this was real, indicating that it had to be because he hit his head. Moments later, his beliefs became irrelevant though, as a tree that was on fire came toppling his way, forcing him to dive out of the way. Him and Pumbaa both grew alarmed after realizing that Ursa was trying to burn them out of the forest. Immediately, Rook's mind went to his birds as he picked up his helmet, exclaiming that they could save them by finding a path to safety from the sky. But he was suddenly overwhelmed upon putting his helmet on and trying to establish their connection. The connection was so unstable that it was terminated just moments later while he desperately begged for their help. That's when the story throws us a curveball, because somehow Rook ends up back on Earth at his family farm, which definitely makes it apparent that he's hallucinating now. While standing in the middle of their crops, gazing upon the barn and the house, for some reason the birds began attacking him, using a bunch of rope to hang Rook in the air the same way he used to hang up his scarecrows. He shouted at the top of his lungs for them to get away from him, but in the midst of doing so, the situation only escalated as the crops were set ablaze. As the world around him grew increasingly hotter, he powered his way off of the stand, discovering his father running out of the barn shortly after, provoking him to call his name, but to no surprise his father was unresponsive and proceeded dumping gas all over the barn, rapidly speeding the growth of the fire. So Rook tried asking him what he was doing, only for Pumbaa to answer for him by saying that his father was the one who destroyed the family farm. He wanted to leave Earth in his own way because despite being a 10th generation farmer, he knew an 11th generation was hopeless. Rook still refused to believe that though, even after bearing witness to this, but Pumbaa assured him that it was the truth, expressing that just like him and the birds always do, he chose flight instead of fight. Soon enough, Rook was hurled back into reality as one of the nearby trees almost collapsed on top of him. Despite how rapidly the fire was growing, Pumbaa continued trying to teach him a lesson, stating that Rook never chose to fight. He left the farm, he left Earth and Donika, and he wanted to leave Exodus as well. Rook wasn't worried about that though, telling Pumbaa he was cooked if he didn't start moving, but Pumbaa still continued scolding him nonetheless, saying that it wasn't the bird screaming in his head to fly away. If he listened closely, he'd realize that it's been him all this time. Flying away is what he wanted. The birds knew that, and they all knew that, because the animals felt what their wardens wanted. Nevertheless, as their escape carried forward, Rook was able to re-establish his connection to the birds, so they started guiding them towards an exit, but as the smoke started to clear and he could see the sky, Rook realized they were leading him to the edge of a ginormous cliff, and upon looking down towards the massive drop, his connection to the birds was terminated once again. Refusing to give up hope, he then linked their minds together one last time, demanding them for help because he knew there was a way to escape the fire. This time, it was gonna take everything he had, and pushing himself further than he'd ever gone before, so he opened himself up to the birds in a way he never had, sharing his fears with them and really trying to listen to them. But in the midst of doing so, he was interrupted by Pumbaa asking that what if giving up runs in his family. Like the forest beside them though, this only ignited Rook's flame, telling Pumbaa never to say that because the hallucination with his father wasn't the truth. He knew who his father was and knew he didn't start the fire. He died fighting to save the farm and every animal on it, and no fever dream was gonna change his mind about that. This led to Pumbaa telling him, "You have faith in your father, so have faith in yourself and in your flock. Open up to them, share your insecurities, your loneliness and beliefs. Truly listen to them." With that being said, once again Rook established the connection, realizing that the flock had a leader for the first time ever, and he wasn't saying fight or flight, he was saying we are fight and flight. So Rook finally took the leap of fate, diving off the monstrous cliff as the flock immediately rushed to his side, guiding him through the air and allowing him to fly. But then unfortunately, it's revealed that Rook was only hallucinating once again, and everything that just happened, including Pumbaa talking, was due to a feedback error caused by interference from the wildlife grid under Ursaw's control, which is honestly kind of a letdown. I thought him flying was pretty cool, but either way, soon after that, nothing short of a miracle happened as the skies began pouring out with rain, instantly calming the fire in the process. And despite a lot of what just happened not being real, Rook definitely learned a lot of lessons and was closer to his flock now, stating he could hear the flock leader while promising to sacrifice everything he had to save the animals on planet Exodus, just like his dad did on the farm. Rook Exodus Issue 6. The final chapter in Volume 1 has arrived. I know you guys have been waiting for this one for a while, and trust me, I was too, but now that it's finally here, it's time to lock in and break it down. But before we proceed, there's some really sucky news I have to break to you guys. Rook Exodus Issue 7 isn't releasing until spring of next year, so it's gonna be a super long wait till we can continue our coverage. However, the end of this issue will have you super freaking hyped for it. With that being said though, let's jump in and break it down. So the last issue consisted of Ursaw and his men burning down the forest Rook was in an effort to end his life. However, thanks to Pumbaa the boar and some rain, not only did Rook end up surviving, but he also formed a healthier relationship to his flock, igniting a new determination to save Exodus's wildlife from Ursaw. This issue, on the other hand, picks up with some of Ursaw's men trailing behind Ursaw's arc. As rain poured in from Exodus's sky, one of them expressed that he missed back when the weather was scheduled because you could plan out your days, assuming that the weathermen were messing with them. According to his buddy though, Ursaw killed all the weathermen, so this wasn't because of them. The real reason was because the world engine was falling apart. Moments later, they got a notification from their computer. Now that the wildlife grid was plugged into Ursaw's system, they could see where all the other wardens were, making it easier to hunt them down and take their helmets. Despite believing Rook was dead though, their map indicated he was heading right towards them at an incredibly rapid pace, which didn't make any sense because it wasn't like he could fly. Nevertheless, that's when Rook and all the birds in his flock came speeding off of a cliff right above their vehicle. Upon sticking his landing, Rook began thinking of his father. Back on Earth, he died while saving their animals from a fire, and minus the dying part, he was determined to do the same thing, causing the adversaries to speed into a nearby boulder by commanding the crows to black out their windshield, which completely destroyed their vehicle in the process of doing so. After that, he stepped on the gas, heading towards the arc at full throttle with the flock soaring right above him to survey the area. Now, this was actually really cool because he didn't even have to tell them to. They just did it by themselves. A clear sign their connection is way stronger now. So for the first time ever, he thanked them and then continued moving forward until running into more of Ursaw's men. Unfortunately for them, it was game over when he whipped out the minigun, effortlessly destroying their combis with it, and then once he was close enough, clinging onto the arc by ejecting himself out of his vehicle. Meanwhile, inside of the Ark, Ursal was holding Donica captive, expressing it was too late for them to stop him because thanks to the grid, the other wardens couldn't hide from him anymore. His soldiers were already in pursuit of them, and soon enough their helmets would be his, just like Donica's. After that, Donica asked who he was under the mask. She wasn't exactly sure, but was confident he came to Exodus for a second chance, only to turn into a genetically modified monster. It was understandable if he was blaming Betterworld for leaving them behind, but the innocent people he was slaughtering had nothing to do with them. Moments later, she brought up instinct influence, the thing that happens when wardens get too close to their animals, resulting in their instincts taking over. As stated by Ursal though, animal instinct may have affected him slightly, but he hadn't succumbed to it how her father did, revealing that he was actually still alive and that she lied to Rook and Carapace. But now that he had the grid, he could finally track him down because in addition to still being alive, he was also the only man who could fix the world engine. Now, the reason Donica lied was because as a result of what he'd become, she didn't associate with him or even consider him her father anymore. Nevertheless, as we move forward, Ursal reveals that his men were in the process of stripping Carapace of the very suit keeping him alive, and the only way he'd consider sparing him was if Donica pledged her loyalty to him. To her relief, she wouldn't have to though, because moments later they were greeted by Rook, jamming a hook right through Ursal's chest. Because of his giant stature, initially Ursal wasn't worried, stating he was too much for Rook to reel in. But clearly he spoke too soon, because right after that, Rook revealed that the other end of the hook wasn't attached to him and instead was attached to his vehicle, causing Ursal to fly out of the room to the top of the Ark and giving Donica an opportunity to free herself. However, because Carapace was still in trouble, Rook was left to deal with Ursal alone while she focused on setting him free. Before their showdown began, Rook indicated that he knew Ursal all too well. He'd give him a chance to surrender peacefully, but he wouldn't even know how, so he whipped out his hand cannons and started blasting him. Completely unfazed and ready for war though, Ursal commanded his bears to send Rook flying, then trying to smash him with his axe saw, resulting in Rook diving out of the way just in time, only to be contacted by Donica moments later, asking how he was holding up. So Rook expressed he was keeping Ursal occupied. After that, she closed in on Carapace's location, discovering that two men were in the middle of operating on him, so without hesitation, she leapt into action and neutralized them effortlessly. After that, she begged Rook to just stay alive. She'd be there immediately upon freeing Carapace, but honestly, things weren't looking so good. Sooner or later, Ursal got so angry that he ripped Rook's helmet off and tossed it to the side, terminating his connection to the flock and telling him he was gonna die alone just like everyone else. When he built the rocket, he understood that the fight for survival was singular. He lived for himself and almost succeeded in escaping, but then the birds and Dire Wolf got into his head. He waited for Swine and lost his chance to escape. Right after that, he snapped Rook's arm and batted him to the ground, further explaining that animals had no loyalty and that because he served the birds no purpose now, they left him to die the same way Betterworld did. But then suddenly, nothing less than a miracle happened. At first, it was one bird speeding towards Ursal with the intention of saving its leader. Of course, one bird was no cause for concern, so Ursal batted it away, not thinking much of its effort. However, moments later, one bird turned into five birds turned into 10, and soon enough, he was overwhelmed by every single member of the flock. Rook's connection to them was so strong now that even without his helmet, they still chose to fight for him and defend him. Despite being way stronger than them, Ursal stood no chance against that kind of volume, sending him plummeting off of the Ark and finally terminating his connection to the bears, resulting in the bears heading back to the forest and the birds coming back to Rook's side. The first one that Ursal batted away lost an eye for Rook and was actually the leader of the flock, making Rook feel like he deserved to be called something, so he named it Poe. When it was all said and done, Ursal's soldiers fled along with his bears. However, in the midst of trying to figure out who Ursal was, Carapace stated his helmet couldn't be removed because it was fused to him. But Donica was able to get some information on his true identity by unlocking part of his file inside of the Ark. Apparently, he didn't come to Exodus with them. He actually worked for Betterworld and only arrived to Exodus 4 months ago. So if he ever woke up, they definitely had some questions for him. After that, while the three of them monitored the wildlife grid, Rook began thinking to himself. They predicted Betterworld would never come back for them, and they were right. Not only did they not come back, but they sent Ursal to recover their tech. Nevertheless, the helmets belonged to them now. Exodus was their home, and they couldn't desert it like they did did to Earth. It was their duty to protect it together. Now they had a new mission, to watch over the people and animals who were left behind. They'd use the grid to locate the other helmets, making sure they were in good hands, and creating a new army of civil and environmental protection. Soon enough, Donica apologized for lying about her father, aka Bloodhound, but with what happened to his mind, he was as good as gone. Carapace hoped that that wasn't the case though, because he was the only one who knew how to fix the world engine. He was located north of the Rockies, so as stated by Rook, that's where they were headed, and they weren't stopping until they found him, giving us a crazy looking preview of what her father actually looked like. But with that being said, guys, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Rook Exodus is so freaking amazing, and I am so hyped to cover the next volume.